So I went ahead and opened up a piece of software similar to Midjourney. You can go for free AI image generators, and just started playing around. And I'll show you some of those images and my kind of experience with this. I could see you using this tool to generate inspiration and reference material for projects you might want to create on your own. You may like Zaha Hadid's work or be asked to reference it. And so I put that in style house on a lake. It comes up with a building with no windows in it, but really kind of a cool form. I go ahead and image search the same thing just to see what references it might be using. You can see some similarities in these concepts as you would expect because there's the same architect's work. But I'm going to go through a couple of examples like this. So we prompt it. The image is coming completely from this 7-word statement. So I take this statement now and we'll go and modify it. We'll now just say instead of on the lake, we'll put it in the woods. You'll notice that it generates a completely new piece of architecture. It's unique. You'll never see this piece of architecture in this piece of software again. And then I'm trying to reference back to see if there's anything like that. In this case, I don't see much very similar to it. Then I go a 4-story office building in a city, and I say viewed from the street to get this kind of an architectural perspective of it. And you'll notice that it doesn't make a 4-story. It looks like it's making many stories, but it's still a very cool and interesting structure. And we can see some of the connections to her actual work here. I took it now, say, a church, kind of like I could have said sacred space in the city viewed from the street. So we get the city, the reference of the road, kind of that urbanism probably, poorly executed in this case. And the symmetry of it is probably kind of odd. That's probably not something that we would normally see in this. So I would consider this kind of a fail, but only a fail to lead to more experimentation with the way I'm using terms to see what might be generated. So then I changed the term to factory in the city and got this building. And I think you can notice that when I Google those same words, we come up with references that are somewhat similar. So there's no reason to say that these tools are doing anything more than what we would assemble mentally by kind of going through and doing Google image searches or other kinds of references like this. And I'm not proposing this as a method of working or anything other than just an experimentation with this tool. Mies van der Rohe style, you might have this idea of really liking this kind of minimalist, very clean look. And so I say, office in the woods. I get what looks like a Crown Hall type building in the woods. Probably not remarkable, something we could have easily come up with ourselves. But this is kind of the failure of a Google image search. I said in the woods, but in this case, it just came back with things that contained wood in them in their description. So just a comparison. In this case, a contemporary building with landscaping in Mies van der Rohe style. I come up with a pretty cool looking building. Look at all of this detail work in the landscaping and things that are happening underneath the building. And then I do a reverse Google image search to find out if that building actually exists somewhere. And so you can see close references to it, but you see nothing exactly like it. And there's a lot of really neat things going on here, things that could inspire you to think about the way you want to. For instance, I think what's really critical here is how beautifully landscaped this transition between the overhang and what happens in the yard, in the forecourt of the building, a kind of a really neat articulation of landscaping, something that I would really take from this kind of an image. Then I put Gaudi in, obviously a very strong kind of architectural representation in the woods, come up with a building like this. I don't know if I'm always doing image searches. I now say building in timber. So this is, did it slam dunk here. Now I asked it to make it in wood and it came up with another one. And I think if you look at this, I'm not seeing anything that really looks very similar to it in this case. But I do a reverse image search of it and I can find some of the kind of ideas. If you look here, the ideas of the way openings are happening in some of these other projects. So, just a reminder that these images are being reconstructed from reference materials that have been assembled off of scanning the internet and everything else. The attendance keyword for this will be AI in architecture. So just to keep moving through this, I think it's really quite fun to do. Frank Lloyd Wright townhouse viewed from the street. I don't think it's a building like you've ever seen of Frank Lloyd Wright's, but really has that kind of many other characteristics of his style. Prairie style townhouse, obviously wasn't building townhouses, but here we have, and it maybe was, I haven't maybe researched it enough, but a quick idea of an articulation of a facade for a townhouse. Prairie style townhouse viewed from the street, just to create, now we get this really kind of an interesting stone wall in front of the architecture. Kind of uncanny how the model knows that these are features that would be prevalent in the architecture, and then tries to create with some kind of representation of it, I guess is the word I'm looking for. You can see all kinds of mistakes in the way the visuals are portrayed. We see a bunch of what looks like driveway entrance aprons not ending anywhere, even the sidewalk containing up what looks to be a sculptural element on the fence, this kind of double repeating pattern on the facade up here. So obviously these are works in progress. But then once again, re-Googling it, or prompting with basically, I think, I say contemporary townhouse, and we come up with this, which I think is really quite nice. So what a great piece of reference material for a project. Frank Gehry, another architect with strong characteristics, easily recognizable. I thought it would be interesting to do. So here we have Frank Gehry style townhouse, probably maybe even more closer to what you might expect to see from the architect. And I didn't bother. I guess at some point I got a little tired of that kind of confirming with the Google search images. But here we have just another one of those, and just tons of images. Here's probably a good fail of that. So I think this one is pretty remarkable. And this one is poor, and this one is really very poor. I would just I think saying tall house maybe threw it for a loop. Metal style house, to me not as attractive, but still interesting. A stone house, well, this kind of throws a loop. Frank Gehry is not really famous for working in stone, so I think the software had a more confusing time of figuring out how to resolve that, but still quite an interesting piece of form. And then brick, once again, not understanding how to articulate brick in Frank Gehry style work, so more fault of the prompts than it is fault of the software to come up with things. And then, still really kind of neat stuff, corporate office buildings in a village. I'm trying to get to that idea of more urbanism, on the corner streetscape, how the building communicates with that first floor level podium. It gets the idea of a podium right. It gets a whole lot of things right in this. It does a whole lot of things screwy, but what a great reference material for a takeoff for you. And then we have a townhouse in the woods, a little disjointed, but still a lot of kind of neat, cool things that you could take as reference from that. So that kind of concludes this idea of where we are right now with artificial intelligence. Once again, I can take you right back to the first slide to kind of, that idea of a disclaimer that we are in the very early days of architecture and artificial intelligence, and we are going to come up with a trough of disillusionment where we will lose our interest in it, and then over the longer period of time we will start to find uses and integrations into the practice of architecture. And so if we are way back in this trough of disillusionment, remember, we're still learning, we're still students, and that you have long careers ahead of you. So this idea of learning it now so that you are in this kind of early majority of adopters, so that you can be very productive with these tools as they become more prevalent in the industry, and maybe you take leadership roles in making that happen.